The thing that stalled a $9 million rural development was not a courtroom speech. It was not a petition. It was not a crowd of angry neighbors standing in front of bulldozers. It was a blue plastic survey flag tied to a willow branch beside a half-buried culvert, in a ditch most people drove past without seeing. Water keeps its own books. It writes in silt against fence wire, in grass laid flat after a storm, in the thin brown line it leaves on a barn post when the creek has risen higher than it should. Most people look at a valley and see land. Nora Whitlow looked at the same valley and saw accounts payable. And in the winter of 2021, the water was about to collect. Nora was 28 years old when Blue Meridian Rural Assets came into Madison County, North Carolina. Her family farm sat on 286 acres of steep pasture and bottomland outside a town small enough that the post office still knew who had changed trucks before the license plate did. The Whitlow place had been in her family since 1938. The farmhouse leaned slightly toward the south, not because it was falling, but because Nora's great-grandfather had built the front wall to take the winter sun. The barn roof had 3 colors of tin on it. The creek cut along the lower boundary in a quiet bend, under county road gravel through a concrete box culvert that had been there longer than anyone on the planning board. Nora knew that bend the way other people know hallways in their own house. She knew which sycamore roots showed after a dry September. She knew the section of fence that always caught leaves before a hard rain. She knew the pasture gate that would swing loose if the creek pushed silt into its lower hinge. Her father had taught her cattle. Her grandmother had taught her weather. And the land, because land is not polite when it teaches, had taught her the rest. Blue Meridian had purchased 4,100 acres across the ridge from her property, abandoned tobacco ground, second-growth timber, 2 failed horse farms, and a long strip of hillside running above 3 family farms along Brushy Fork. The company called its plan a rural enterprise and lifestyle corridor. At the first public meeting, held in a multi-purpose room at the county services building, the phrase sounded clean enough to make people stop asking what it meant. There would be light commercial space, storage warehouses, cottage rentals, private roads, stormwater retention, and a promise of jobs repeated often enough to become its own kind of evidence. The project engineer showed a large map on the wall. On the map, stormwater from the lower parcels moved west, away from the Whitlow farm. Blue arrows bent around the ridge, crossed a retention pond, then drained into a tributary nobody in the room used for anything. Nora sat in the back row with a mud stain on one sleeve and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Then the engineer mentioned the culvert. He called it a minor conveyance structure. That was when Nora raised her hand. She asked whether the model included winter water levels at the county road bend. The engineer said the drainage assessment used accepted regional rainfall data, included the Timber Hall Road cut into Parcel 22 after the last elevation data was updated. He said the data was current enough for preliminary permitting. She asked whether anyone had walked the outlet end of the culvert after a storm. A man from Blue Meridian smiled without showing his teeth. He thanked her for her local perspective. There are smiles that invite conversation, and there are smiles that close a door so gently they expect you to thank them for not slamming it. Nora sat down. She did not argue again in that room. She drove home, changed into rubber boots, and walked to the creek before dark. The blue survey flag was already there. Someone from the project team had tied it near the ditch line to mark the culvert outlet. But the flag was wrong by almost 15 feet. It marked where the water was supposed to leave, not where the water actually left. The true outlet was half swallowed by sediment, blackberry roots, and a broken slab of concrete that had shifted sideways. Nora crouched in the ditch and shined her phone light into the opening. The bottom third was packed solid. The right side was choked with roots. Water would not pass cleanly through that structure in a winter storm. It would back up. And when it backed up, it would not follow the arrows on Blue Meridian's map. It would rise into the road bend, spill over the low shoulder, and run straight into the Whitlow lower pasture. Nora took one photograph, then another. Then she pulled a folded feed receipt from her coat pocket and wrote down the time, the temperature, and the height of the mud line on the willow branch. That feed receipt became the first page of the file. Over the next 37 days, Nora built a case without calling it a case. She started with county GIS records and found that Blue Meridian's drainage consultant had used elevation data last refreshed in 2012. The data set still showed an unbroken slope above parcel 22. But Nora knew the slope had not been unbroken for years. In 2016, a logging crew had cut a haul road across that hillside. It was not a paved road. It did not look important from the county line, but it was crowned high in the middle and ditched on both sides, and during heavy rain, it acted like a gutter, catching runoff that used to spread slowly through brush and sending it toward the lower field. She requested the timber harvest notification from the state forestry office. It took 9 days. The paperwork confirmed the road cut. She printed aerial photos from 2015 and 2018, taped them side by side at her kitchen table, and circled the difference in black marker. Then she measured the culvert. Not professionally, not elegantly, just carefully. She used a 6-foot aluminum level, a fiberglass measuring tape, a fence staple for a fixed point, and 3 storms' worth of mud lines. The obstruction was not total. That mattered. If it had been total, anyone would have seen the problem. It was worse than that. It was blocked just enough to look harmless in dry weather and fail under pressure. By Nora's estimate, the opening was 68% restricted. Wrote that number twice, once on the receipt and once on the back of an electric bill, because she did not trust herself to keep only one copy. The third piece came from an old cattle crossing above her pasture. Years earlier, a neighbor had dumped stone to keep his truck from sinking while moving hay. It had been legal, ordinary, forgettable. But the crossing had raised the edge of the swale by several inches, turning slow sheet flow into a narrow channel when the ground was saturated. The developer's map showed water spreading out. Nora's pasture showed water cutting in. Maps are confident when they have not been rained on. By late January, Nora had a white binder thick enough that the metal rings no longer closed cleanly. Inside were photographs, dated field notes, county records, 2 aerial images, handwritten measurements, and 1 page from a licensed water resources engineer named Marta Ivers, whom Nora had found through a Farm Bureau referral and paid $525 for a single site review. Marta's note did not use dramatic language. That was why it mattered. It said the existing model appeared to omit post-2016 surface alterations, and that a restricted culvert at the lower bend could substantially increase backwater flooding on adjacent agricultural land during high-volume rain events. Nora put that page at the front of the binder. The second public meeting was held on February 8, 2022. By then, Blue Meridian's representatives had learned Nora's name. The first man with the soft smile was not there. In his place was a younger consultant named Caleb Rusk, who carried a leather folder and spoke as if every sentence had been approved before he arrived. The room was fuller this time. Farmers stood along the wall. A county commissioner leaned against the windowsill. The local paper sent a reporter, who kept her recorder on the table and her notebook open. Nora did not speak first. The planning board chair did. He had the binder in front of him. He asked Caleb Rusk whether the stormwater plan accounted for the 2016 Timber Hall Road across Parcel 22. Rusk said he would need to confirm the specific field condition with the engineering team. The chair asked whether the culvert outlet at the county road bend had been inspected after rainfall. Rusk said the consultant had performed a standard site review. The chair asked whether the drainage arrows on the presentation map were based on 2012 elevation data. Rusk paused for a second, but it was the first honest sound in the room. He said the preliminary model used available county and federal data appropriate for the permitting phase. That sentence was meant to move the meeting forward. It did the opposite. The board chair opened Nora's binder and read one line from Marta Ivers' assessment. If the restricted culvert and post-2016 grade changes are excluded from the drainage model, peak discharge toward the Whitlow lower pasture could increase by an estimated 310% during a 25-year storm event. Nobody shouted. Nobody clapped. That was not the kind of room it was. But people shifted in their chairs, because 310% is not a feeling. Remember that changes who pays when the water arrives. Blue Meridian had projected stormwater mitigation for the lower parcels at $240,000. Marta's preliminary estimate, if the culvert had to be replaced, the Hall Road drainage corrected, and a sediment basin added near the road bend, was closer to $920,000. The difference sat on the table like a bill with no name on it. Rusk said the company respected community concerns. Nora heard the word concerns and looked down at her hands. That was how people dismissed evidence when it came from the wrong person. Concern was what they called it, before a credential repeated it. After the meeting, a man she did not know told her the county could not hold back progress because one pasture got wet. Nora did not answer him. She was thinking about the winter of 2019, when the creek had climbed 11 inches above the lower gate hinge and left foam caught in the wire. She was thinking about the calves that would have nowhere high to stand if the east bottom flooded after dark. She was thinking about the mortgage, the feed account, the broken hay tedder, and the kind of loss that never looks dramatic on paper because it arrives as 15 smaller losses at once. The permits were tabled, not denied, just delayed pending a revised hydrological review. Saved the farm, but nobody knew it yet. 3 weeks later, rain came hard from the south. Nora was awake before sunrise. She put on her coat, drove a T-post deeper beside the willow branch, and marked the water line every 40 minutes until noon. At 10:20, Water backed out of the culvert mouth exactly as she had said it would. At 11:05, it crossed the road shoulder. At 11:40, it entered the first dip of her pasture. Not enough to ruin anything. Enough to prove the path. She took video from 3 angles. She photographed the blue survey flag half underwater, bent downstream, toward the place the map had insisted the water would not go. By April, the new survey was complete. It confirmed the Hall Road effect. It confirmed the restricted culvert. It confirmed that the lower drainage path had been misread. Blue Meridian revised the plan. The concrete box culvert was replaced with a larger open-bottom structure. A sediment basin was added above the road bend. The Hall Road ditches were cut and rocked to slow runoff instead of throwing it downhill. 47 acres of the lowest buildable ground were removed from the first phase plan. The final mitigation cost recorded in the permit file was just over $1 million. More than 4 times the original projection. The development still moved forward. That matters. This was not a story about stopping every machine or proving that every new plan is wrong. It was about making the plan answer to the ground it wanted to change. That winter, the lower pasture did not flood. Neither did the 2 farms below it. In May, Marta Ivers mailed Nora a copy of the final drainage approval with a note clipped to the front. The note said, "Your field record found what the model was not built to see." Nora read it once at the mailbox, folded it in half, and put it behind the 2018 aerial photograph in the white binder. She never gave an interview. Stand at the fence and watch the construction crews like she had won something. She replaced the broken gate hinge. She sold 2 steers. She planted orchard grass on a slope that had been thinning for years. When people at the feed store brought up the meeting, she shrugged and said the creek had already explained it. That was not modesty. It was accuracy. Because Nora had not beaten the engineers by being louder, she had beaten the map by knowing what the map could not remember. She knew that a road cut can become a gutter, that a culvert can fail slowly enough to look fine, that a few inches of stone at a cattle crossing can redirect the future of a field. And that water does not care who presents the slideshow. The blue survey flag stayed on the willow branch until summer, faded almost white by the sun. Then, one morning, after a night of gentle rain, Nora found it caught in the fence wire beside the lower gate. She untied it, let the mud dry, and slipped it into the front pocket of the binder with the receipts, the photographs, and the engineer's note. Not as a trophy, as a bookmark. Because water keeps its own books, and once in a while, someone quiet enough to read them can make everyone else open the ledger too.